Hello again, everyone. Welcome to the Fantasy Slant, powered by Pro Football Focus and brought to you by DraftKings. I'm your usual host, Michael Moore, along with my usual co-host, Russell Clay. Say hello, Russ.
What's up?
All right, Russ. So quick rundown of tonight's festivities. We'll do our usual news and notes section. Per the usual, we have a major injury to discuss. I feel like we should just call it like the injury report just to start off, just because that's how it always is.
The depression report.
Yeah, we'll get the sad stuff out of the way. And then we'll go over a couple of the headlines for the week, a couple of guys that came out of truly nowhere to become fantasy relevant, at least for week 7. And then I think you and I are going to get into a little bit of some teams that are maybe experiencing a resurgence or even just for the first time being fantasy relevant as a whole. We're talking, of course, of the Dolphins and Jaguars, which we'll get to in a little bit. We'll have the usual Gary Barnidge portion of the show, where I plead for Gary Barnidge to come on the show. And then we will wrap up with our usual DraftKings values for next week. So without further ado, Russ, let's just get started and get this over with. Arians Foster blows his Achilles out. Probably done for the year. Well, I'm just going to say that's done for the year. I would be done for the year. You know, it's been a really bad year for Houston, not just fantasy-wise, but really in any facet of football. What does this do for anyone there? I mean, look, you've still got DeAndre Hopkins, which is a stud, and I think you could sort of touch on a little bit of the lack of overreaction you all should have. But overall, what does this do to Houston as far as fantasy relevance goes?
I'd say this secures DeAndre Hopkins' target title for 2015. I don't see any way he basically doesn't get over 200 targets now, so which is just unbelievable. But to get back to Foster for a second, this is not good. This was not a good age for him to be blowing out his Achilles. This is not a good injury for running backs in general, even if it's their first or second year. Foster is sort of the type of player that has mentioned before that this game hurts and like he's not going to kill himself for the game. So I'm not saying his career is necessarily over yet, but man, it could be, you know?
Yeah, and I think, you know, for redraft, obviously, the season's over. But for Dynasty, too, I think you probably have to assume as much.
Yeah.
There's just so much that a guy can take before he goes, you know what, it's not worth it anymore. And look, you've got now a blown Achilles. You've got some ACLs that have been torn. I mean, pretty much every lower body injury you can
hamstring.
think of. Yeah, for a football player, Arians Foster has had it. So, yeah, I think it's probably time to bail. Is there anyone in that backfield for you that does anything for you?
I mean, I think Alfred Blue or Chris Polk's actually looked pretty good. I think they're going to sort of split the carries. I'd say advantage Polk there. He's looked pretty good, but nothing really to see here, kind of move along. But in terms of the Texans offense in general, I pretty much see it going the same way it was sort of this entire year. They're just going to get blown out. Their defense is not good. So they're going to be in comeback mode. They're going to get random points at the end of the game. I mean, Nate Washington this week was wild. So, yeah, there's going to be stuff like that. But
yeah, but let's cover, because I know you wanted to touch on this. DeAndre Hopkins, seemingly it was a perfect situation for him, at least in garbage time, to pile up some fantasy points, but didn't maybe quite get as much as we had hoped. What did you want to let the folks know about, you know, your stud players and what you should expect each week?
Right. So if you've owned DeAndre Hopkins this year, you've pretty much gotten the best treatment you could have had these first 6 or 7 or so weeks. And this week he had what? 6 for 55 or around that stat line. And that's 11 points in PPR. And we can confirm that is his floor. So this is one of the worst weeks.
He is human, but that is the floor.
This is one of the worst weeks he's going to have all year. And even if you have a super stud, which he basically is now, they're going to have down weeks. That's just the way it works, you know? Same with Devonta Freeman. I mean, he had like 15 PPR points this week. It's going to happen. it's not going to happen every week, but there are going to be those weeks where they don't necessarily carry your team to victory. And that's just the way it goes. A player's not going to get 3,000 receiving yards and 20 touchdowns in the season. So,
well, and you brought up Freeman, and a couple interesting points that I wanted to bring up, Russ, and I actually had meant to bring this up later when we talked about the Dolphins, but the Titans defense, at least on a yards per game angle, is not that bad. They're fourth in the league as far as yards allowed per game. So Devontae Freeman not going off is not exactly a surprise, or it shouldn't be. And I'm personally, and I know I'm in the minority here, I'm still hesitant that they, still don't want to involve Tevin Coleman somehow. I'm not saying they want Tevin Coleman to be the lead back. I don't think that at all. But I don't think, you're going to have the 30 carries a game like Freeman had against Dallas a couple weeks ago anymore. I think Freeman is an excellent running back one this season, but again, I think his value also is going to come a lot from the receiving game and being able to honestly be the third down passing down back as opposed to just the 30 carry a game guy with 3 rushing touchdowns.
Right. There's a lot of it's a lot of dynamics going on in that situation. Like you mentioned, they probably don't want him to keep getting that many touches. I mean, there's a chance that 5-game stretch or 4-game stretch was the best 4 performances he's going to have all year. And just looking at season-long totals of yards, touchdowns, receptions, and receiving yards, I mean, it kind of is what it is. He's not going to keep that up all year. But
I can't believe it. Not like our favorite tight end is, but we'll get to that. Yeah, I don't know. I don't see. And look, I could be wrong. It could be a month from now and he's got, 500 more yards and 8 more touchdowns for all we know. But
he doesn't need to,
Right.
He doesn't need to score 35 points a game.
Right. Yeah. Don't expect that every week. And speaking of not expecting things that happen this week to repeat themselves, Darren McFadden, for some reason, 152 rushing yards and a touchdown. I don't even know if we can call that vintage McFadden. It was like never before seen McFadden, just running wild. In fairness, Joseph Randle, who has been the lead back so far, had an oblique injury, or at least that's what the company line is. And McFadden, to his credit, took advantage. He had 30 carries, and he rolled with it. So, are you buying McFadden all, Russ, or is this a 1-week blip?
I am buying Des Bryant when he comes back, and that's it. For the Cowboys offense. I mean, as I mentioned, McFadden is still extremely athletic. You can't expect this to continue, though. Even the 30 carries or the efficiency per touch. I think it was just a really good game, and we can have it sit there and be what it is. Yeah,
I'll make this deal with you. If Darren McFadden gets 150 again next week, we'll call this the Darren McFadden fantasy slant. Okay. I will make that promise to you.
Can I decline that offer?
Well, no, because I'm the host. So I have to create the link, so no.
Fair enough.
All right, so let's stay actually in the same game and with the same theme of where did that come from. Orleans Darkwa, exactly. We'll pause for dramatic effect there. 48 yards and a touchdown yesterday. Honestly, looked like the best running back for the Giants. Definitely the freshest out there. Do we have a 4 running back committee now, Russ? Is there one that's sort of taken a lead? What do you think about that whole situation?
This is one I'm going to need another week on, but I was encouraged by his performance. I can't say he was really on my radar.
I don't know whose radar he was on, but if he was on anyone's radar, good for you.
But impressive performance and something we should be taking into account, maybe picking up in a dynasty league and keeping an eye on in redraft. I mean, and if you're in a deeper league, pick him up, just in case if there's nothing on the waiver wire, just because.
Well, and to me, none of the Giants running backs this year has exactly impressed. Right. None of them are going for 5 yards a carry. None of them are getting exclusively goal line touches. So why not? Hey, who cares? It's just another lottery ticket for you to pick up. And I guarantee you, in 99% of the leagues out there, people listening, he's available on your waiver wire. So
Right.
look, go put a claim in. It can't hurt, especially this late in the season. The pickings are going to get real slim.
It was kind of like Stephon Diggs a few weeks ago. You weren't really sold on the player necessarily at the time when he had that first game for 87 yards, but it worked out. And most of the
now
time,
that he's getting 100, you're sold.
yeah, but most of the time it's not going to work out. But you just want to hit that one time,
Right.
So,
Yeah, and look, especially this late in the season, if
right.
everyone is experiencing the injury bug, I promise you. So it doesn't hurt. And look, it could just be a 1 week thing. He could not get 8 more touches the rest of the season, but at least you got to like your chances of somebody potentially picking up the slack. So,
right.
All right. So some additional news, Russ, and we'll see what you think about this and the effects. The Lions, fired offensive coordinator Joe Lombardi today. Just his second year into that gig, so it's not exactly like it was overdue. The Lions so far this year, they were 20th in yards per game. Matthew Stafford, by comparison, this year was averaging 266 yards a game. Did have a touchdown to interception ratio of 12-9 so far, but was averaging 266 yards a game last year too, and finished with a touchdown to interception ratio of 22-12. So I guess you could argue the turnovers are up, but I don't know, man. I mean, if you look at the other aspects, they certainly gave Lombardi enough tools, I would say, to create a good offensive environment, right? So last year they drafted Ebron, 10th overall, who, by the way, that's the highest drafted tight end since Vernon Davis 10 years ago. Even this year, their first-round pick, Laken Tomlinson, guard, and then they drafted, of course, Amir Abdullah in the second round. Now, Abdullah himself hasn't exactly impressed. He's only got 3.6 yards a carry. He's only averaging 2 catches a game. So I guess the big question is, Russ, does the firing of Lombardi do anything for Lions players this year?
I'm not so sure. Their schedule was letting up either way. As you saw the last 2 weeks, Calvin Johnson's caught a touchdown each of the last 2 weeks. Sort of Matthew Stafford starting to get things rolling a little bit. And seeing Ebron come back and be a big part of the offense, even just coming back, I really like them going forward. They ran through the toughest defenses in the NFL in the first half of the season, so things are going to get easier, and I think this sort of trend of the last 2 games will continue.
Well, and that's actually the perfect segue, Russ. Let's talk about a couple teams that are seeing sort of a resurgence and honestly, experiencing fantasy relevance for the first time. But to that first point, when you talk about, maybe a fresh start, the Miami Dolphins the last 2 weeks, both in real life and fantasy-wise, are really blowing the doors off. I mean, I don't know what Dan Campbell is doing differently. I don't know if he's just saying, screw it, like everyone just play loose and go for it or what. But a couple of numbers for Dolphins players the last 2 weeks. You've got Ryan Tannehill, 548 yards, 6 touchdowns, an 83% completion percentage the last 2 weeks. Lamar Miller, especially, he's averaging 144 rushing yards a game. He's also caught 5 balls for 66 yards over those 2 weeks. He's got 3 touchdowns total. What is this going to continue for Miami? Now, in fairness, they played Tennessee and Houston the last 2 weeks. But like I said, Tennessee's defense was actually not bad. The 4th best team when it comes to yards per game allowed. Now, Houston, you could argue, their defense is pretty bad, so it's not all that surprising. But are you buying the Dolphins the rest of the way, Russ?
I am, in terms of which is more believable between these last 2 weeks and the first mess of games they had. It's just so clear this was a positive regression candidate after Philbin got fired. They were just playing so below their talent level as a team. It won't continue like this, but this is a good team, So I do expect this to continue in some capacity.
Yeah, and look, I think I'm buying in too. I mean, and I like what you said. This appears to be more like the real Dolphins rather than the first month or so. And look, I think there's something to be said about the tension around that team with Philbin around because they didn't know if he was staying or going, but now they've got some resolution and can just focus on, hey, essentially doing their job. I mean, Lamar Miller even said he wasn't sure how many carries he was going to get when Philbin was around, so he was pressing a little bit, right? But now he knows he's going to get the ball, so he can sort of do his thing. And, yeah, he's running wild. I mean, 175 yards yesterday on the ground, plus 60 more, receiving. I mean, that's solid running back one territory, right?
Yeah, I think he's a low-end running back one going forward. This is kind of what he did last year, just on a per-touch basis,
Yeah, and I've never been the biggest believer in Tannehill, even entering this season when it was the popular, cool thing to do. But he's coming on strong, man. I mean, it's kind of hard to deny anymore, right?
The most interesting part of this offense is Rashard Matthews getting more snaps than Devontae Parker. And Parker was getting more snaps, and then they slowly decreased the past few weeks. And Matthews is sort of running with this job. I don't think it'll last through next year or the next few years, but I think he's a wide receiver 3 for the rest of the year.
Yeah. So, and speaking of wide receivers for the Dolphins, where are you putting Jarvis Landry? If you're truly buying into this Dolphins team fantasy wise, where are you putting Landry then?
High
wide receiver
floor.
1 for you, wide receiver 2.
No. Low end wide receiver 2. There's too many good receivers right now to have him any higher than that. But yeah, a really high floor player who can still have games like he had this weekend. So yeah.
Well, yeah, and honestly, he had a very un-Jarvis Landry-like game. He had 5 catches for 83 yards for a very nice 16 yards a catch average, which is very unlike Jarvis Landry. But yeah, there's obviously something going on. So I think we're in agreement. We are buying on the Dolphins. Let's go upstate, Russ. Let's talk about the Jaguars. They're on a roll too. I mean, you've got Blake Bortles, who has been a top 5 fantasy quarterback the last month or so. His receivers they're really good. I mean, I don't think you can deny it anymore. TJ Yeldon turned in a solid performance this week. What are your thoughts on the Jags the rest of the way?
Yeah, Blake Bortles, the number 4 fantasy quarterback right now. Allen Robinson, number 5 in PPR, and Allen Hurns, 13th.
Allen Hurns. Who called that? I didn't call that. Did you call that?
I was a Marquise Lee fan, so I was trying to hedge against Hurns as much as I could. But yeah,
rest in peace, Russ. It's okay.
I think Hurns has seized this number 2 role, even over Julius Thomas for now. I don't see any reason why Hurns. I mean, the touchdowns aren't going to keep up like this every game, but he gets targets every game, and he has a nice yards per reception, and I don't see why this wouldn't continue. This doesn't seem like a regression type of thing. Allen Robinson is he's a wide receiver 1. I mean, not in fantasy, but in terms of NFL, he's a legitimate, bordering on high end wide receiver 1 in the NFL. So that's shocking to me, but it's
the first step, Russ, is admitting you have a problem, and you've admitted it. So you had a Marquise Lee problem. Now we can cure it, and the cure is Allen Robinson. That's what it is. So,
yep.
Yeah, it's kind of don't believe me. I will not shy away. I did not call this for Bortles. I thought he was average at best. And look, I think he still could be, but look, he's taken advantage of the fact that teams are underestimating them on offense, I think. Right? I think and look, that's the first step to being eventually a good quarterback, is if you can take advantage of those weaknesses, and he's taking advantage right now. TJ Yeldon, hopefully he can sort of continue this trend. He wasn't really impressing up to this point, but look, he had 100 yards this week. Hopefully this is a sign of things to come. And like you said, Allen Robinson, you can't deny it anymore. He's got the physical traits. He's got obviously Blake Bortles' faith. He's his number one target, and there's no doubt about it. So, yeah, I think you could roll with him as your wide receiver one the rest of the way.
Yeah, Yeldon has 200 100-yard rushing games in the last 3, so I think he's trending in the right direction and a buy as well.
Yeah, and you know, not to be underestimated, they did it against a pretty decent Bills defense too. So it wasn't as if they were playing some team laying down and just piling up points. And look, if anything, it was a relevant game. I mean, they had a big lead, but had to sort of stave off Buffalo towards the end. So it wasn't all garbage time, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Yeah, so you're buying on the Jags the rest of the way then.
I am. I don't think Bortles will end up with this type of volume at the end of the year, but he's a low-end quarterback one right now. And their schedule is easy. So, yeah, I think this will continue.
Yeah. All right, Russ. It's now on to everyone's favorite segment, the Gary Barnidge portion of the show, where I implore all of you listening to trade for Gary Barnidge. Give up what you have to give up at all costs. This past week, Russ, 6 catches, 101 yards, no touchdowns, but still a very productive day for a tight end, right?
In weeks 3 through 7, Gary Barnidge has 30 more points than any other tight end in the NFL.
Any tight end, including Rob Gronkowski, Russ.
Even more than 30 for Rob Gronkowski.
Good God. On the season, and this was a stat I shared with you yesterday, Rob Gronkowski, 23 catches, 425 yards, 5 touchdowns. Gary Barnidge, 27 catches, 413 yards, and 5 touchdowns. So, look, I'm not saying he's better than Rob Gronkowski, but I'm saying he's just as good as Rob Gronkowski. Okay.
He makes some spectacular catches, too. His role is sealed for this year. You can pretty much plug him in, and he's a high-end tight end one. I mean, you can't really deny that. You can bicker over Eifert and, Martellus Bennett and all those other guys, but
Nope. It's all Gary Barnidge all the time. Okay. Gary, if you're listening, we want you on the show. We need you on the show. Please make this portion of the podcast relevant by coming on the show. So, look, like I said 3 weeks ago, and this is one of the few times I was dead on, he's going to be a tight end. He's going to be the second highest tight end for fantasy the rest of the season. I have no doubt.
I'm so intrigued how they're going to handle this in the offseason. Are they like, do they have to sign him to a deal if he continues this?
It's the Browns. Like, who knows? Honestly, who knows? I don't know.
He's been super impressive. And I mean, it's not just junk yards either. Like, he's getting this throughout the game. He's a huge part of the game plan. He's like a featured player in their offense, which is, it makes things harder to get, because teams are more focused on you. So I don't know. It's pretty amazing. And one of the better storylines of the fantasy season so far.
Yeah. I mean, in all seriousness, if you manage to get him, whether on the waiver wire or whatever, I mean, good for you, because he's one of those guys that's paying off for you big time. That probably cost you nothing, but now he might be your best player on the team.
He did cost you nothing, and we talk about we're looking for the Odell Beckhams of sort of this year. If you picked up Gary Barnidge in week 3 and started him ever since, I mean, he's winning you weeks.
Yeah, and he's providing you a distinct advantage in the tight end position. I mean, literally, it's only Gronk that you could say you would rather have every week so far. Seriously. I mean, any other tight end, he could go toe-to-toe. I mean, look, there's probably better tight ends out there just in a vacuum. But look, guys like Kelsey, we've established Andy Reid just hates Travis Kelsey. I don't know what he did to him, but he just doesn't like him. Okay.
And Eifert is going to have down weeks just because of the offense he's in. So
Right. You've got Greg Olsen. To me, Greg Olsen might be the closest thing to Gary Barnidge because he's one of the few passing weapons in that whole team. But again, even Gary Barnidge, truthfully, is getting the touchdowns that Greg Olsen doesn't get. So yeah, I mean, again, it started out facetious, but I am dead serious at this point. I'm all in on the Gary Barnidge stock.
And regardless of format as well, it's not just receptions, it's not just touchdowns, it's not just yards, it's everything.
Yeah,
so
he's impressing every week. You can't stop him. So anyway, please go get him. He's probably actually too high now of cost. I mean, you probably couldn't get him now because somebody would ask something crazy, which I'm not saying you should pay it, but you should consider it.
And then pay it.
Hey, it depends. Anyway. All right. So yeah, Gary, call me or tweet me. You know how to find me. All right. So before we get to the DraftKings value plays of the week, Russ, with millions being won each week, every play in every game could take you closer to a life-changing payday. Hurry over to DraftKings.com now and use our promo code PFF to play for free with your first deposit in this Sunday's $1 million fantasy football contest. First place takes home $100,000. That's PFF for a free entry now at DraftKings.com. So with that said, Russ, we come to, again, what's quickly becoming my favorite portion of the show, because I actually use this information when I play DraftKings on Sunday. And some guys that are maybe some good values out there. They do put out the salaries for next week, luckily pretty early, so it gives us a chance to look at those. So would you like to lead off, Russ, or would you like me to?
I'll lead off. Okay, so Todd Gurley was probably the most obvious play of last week at 5,000.
He was, and I know this, and I don't know if you noticed this, Russ, but in the Millie Maker, he was owned by, I don't know, 2/3 of the entries there. So thank you, everyone, for listening. You obviously got the hint. So I don't know if the increase in price will prohibit people from doing that, but I'm going to guess you're going to tell me that price doesn't matter for Gurley anyway.
Well, at 6,300, he's still a huge value. And I mean, he's going to be high owned again like he was this week, but not quite as high, but he's still going to be high owned. But in cash games, you pretty much have to throw him in there again. He's just getting too much volume for you to sort of ignore him at that price.
Yeah, I mean, look, he can be your top running back on your team at that price, and it's still a reasonable price. It's not like, you're in the Le'Veon Bell $8,000 range. I mean, 6,300 is very affordable. So, all right, so let's stay with running backs. I put down Doug Martin, who had another good game again yesterday. I mean, he had 100 yards rushing and is seemingly running wild, and who knows what brought this on, but he's back, and he's acting like a running back one. He's the 7th highest scoring running back in DraftKings points, but only the 13th highest priced running back, which, look, that right there, I think provides you some good value. So if you went with Martin as your top running back too, I don't think I could fault you for that.
Yeah, Martin is sustaining that running back class's value there with Trent Richardson and David Wilson. So he's carrying them along on his back right now. But yeah, he's finally had the comeback season we were expecting for a while. He's been great per touch, and they're starting to give him the role. So over 19 rushing attempts in the last 3 games, in each of the last 3 games. So. And I mean, he didn't get a touchdown last week, and he had 23 points. So, yeah, he's a great value at that price.
Yeah, and I think people can finally rest assured that Charles Sims is not going to take carries away.
Right.
Bobby Rainey's not going to take carries away. They're going to go with Doug Martin. And when you're drafting for DraftKings, you need a guy that is going to get the ball.
Well, Charles Sims was pretty productive this season so far in terms of fantasy points, but Doug Martin's playing so well that, like you said, he pretty much sealed the deal for himself, All
right, let's go to quarterback. And again, I still don't understand it. Andy Dalton, the highest scoring quarterback in fantasy DraftKings points, but the 12th highest priced quarterback. So again, probably maybe more so in cash games, but even not. I mean, that's still a good value at quarterback, right? What are we missing here that he's still not priced up there with the Aaron Rodgers and Tom Brady's of the world?
From the DraftKings lobby, you probably, unless you click on it, you can't see that he has red hair. So
Yeah.
I'd imagine that has
That's
something to
prohibiting a
do.
lot of people. They don't want to
'Cause
roll with the redhead.
I don't understand that price whatsoever. That'll be a great cash game play, a great tournament play. Stack him with AJ Green or stack him with Eifert. I mean, it's been every week, and Pittsburgh has a good run defense, but their pass defense is just okay. So that's another nice matchup for them.
Yeah, I think I would run all over that. So, all right, so let's go to some receivers, Russ. I'm going to keep playing this guy until he proves me otherwise. Martavis Bryant only played 2 games. Last game, not exactly the breakout game he had in week 6, but look, still at 5,300, he's the second option on a very good passing team, and he doesn't have to be your top receiver on that team. But I think of any receiver, he might have the most upside. Is that right?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I mean, we're just all waiting for Ben Roethlisberger to get back, and then things are going to be awesome. But hey, he's sustained his value even without him. And we can say he's touchdown dependent, but I mean, these big plays are pretty consistent. And he's expanding that sample size to not just be a 1 year, type of deal. So when you start to see that efficiency sort of last and keep going, maybe this is just going to be who he is as a player.
Yeah. And look, it's a combination of him and everyone else on that team, but I don't think there's any doubt who the second option is in the passing game behind Antonio Brown.
Right.
Marcus
No
Wheaton had a chance and did not take advantage. You had Darius Hayward-Bay, who, look, to his credit, as a fill-in, didn't do bad, but look, I think we can all agree Martavis Bryant is light years ahead of that. Heath Miller is going to take a back seat now. It's pretty much the Bell and Brown and Bryant show.
We had a Marcus Wheaton truthers meeting, and we all collectively decided to wave the white flag together. So we got
disbanded. Officially.
Yeah, even before Martavis came back, we all decided that
Yeah, he's done. He's not good. He's not good. Of course, watch like this week. He goes off at a $3,000 price and has like 30 DraftKings points, but probably not.
No.
All right, some more receivers for you people. Steve Smith, the 5th highest scoring receiver, yet only the 17th highest priced. Let's get a real-time update as far as what Steve Smith is doing at the moment. 2 receptions for 38 yards, so not bad. But, yeah, I mean, look, he's still the number 1 option on that team, and I think there's still some value to be placed on that, and he's still only the 17th highest price receiver. So again, it's one of those that, whether it's cash game or not, I think that's a pretty good value for that position.
Right. I mean, when you're going down the value list, you're sort of just looking for wide receiver ones, and when you can initially find that on the first go around at a decent price, yeah, he's all set. That's a good price for him. I
mean, don't get me wrong. He's defying all logic and reason, but he still keeps chugging along, man. And he's not a guy you want to argue with about staying fantasy relevant. He's fantasy relevant. Just say yes.
I'm looking at Stephon Diggs at 4,800. It seems to me that they're making him the number 1 wide receiver in that offense. It seemed pretty seamless that he jumped Mike Wallace there in terms of targets, and he's just performing so well. That's such a cheap price for a player that has had over 6 receptions in each of the last 3 games.
Yeah, and look, who knows? This might be the beginning of the Vikings turning a corner this season, but I agree with you. It's sort of been a de facto passing of the torch between Diggs and Mike Wallace. I mean, like you said, he led the team in targets this week for the first time. He had an amazing catch against Detroit where he dove into the end zone for it. The talent was always there with him. He just had some injury concerns going into the draft and stuff like that. But look, It's paying off now. And I mean, at that price, I will be all over that again. I can assure you.
And sort of paying up for Julio Jones. People might not want to pay up for him this week. So that he's out. Julio Jones is always going to be owned by a significant portion, but it might be a little lower this week because of his price. So that's someone that's kind of interesting in a good matchup.
Yeah, and I think and you know what? I will probably be one of those that takes Julio. Like I said, he played the Titans last week. Again, the defense is not bad there, so it's not all that surprising that he only had 9 for 92 and a touchdown. That's still a pretty good game. It's not like 10 for 180, but still, it's a pretty good game.
And he looked healthy.
Right.
And people are going to look at that box score and see he hasn't had over 100 yards in 4 games, and they might fade him because of that, But
yeah, I'm still going to be all over that. And look, not a knock against Roddy White or Leonard Hankerson, but there are no other options there. He's it.
Yeah.
All right. I will let you, Russ, lead the Michael Floyd truther meeting. Go.
I wouldn't say it's a truther meeting. It's he's 35.
Funeral?
He's 3,500 in a high-powered offense, and they're playing Cleveland. And that's all I got.
But in fairness, so far tonight, we're at 12:35 left in the second quarter. He does have one catch for 33 yards. So I don't want to say he's on his way because he's definitely not, but he's got something. So I'll give you that. And then to round out our DraftKings values, again, I'm a broken record at this point, but Gary Barnidge, still only the 7th highest tight end. I think his price this week is 4,900. Again, unless you're going with Gronk in the early game, Gary Barnidge is probably going to be my guy for a lot of my lineups this week.
Yeah, 4,700 for Barnidge after, he's getting you 20 points a week. So, yeah, that's...
And look, you've got Gronk on a Thursday night game. So for a lot of people, he's going to be not available. You've got Antonio Gates, who could potentially miss a couple weeks now with that MCL sprain. There's just not a lot of other options at tight end.
Right.
It's one of those that Barnidge is up there with the Kelseys of the world where, hey, he's got a pretty high floor, but also a pretty high ceiling, which those guys are pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
So anyone else, Russ, that you want to bestow on the listening public?
I wouldn't be afraid to go back to Le'Veon Bell again this week.
Okay.
Again, you're paying up, but there's enough deals out there that I think you can pay up for some of these high-priced guys again, I wouldn't avoid Freeman because of last week, like we talked about. So, yeah, those types.
Yeah. All right, Russ. Well, that was a good show. Again, we only limited it to one injury that we had to talk about this week.
This was a much more optimistic show. So.
It was, yeah. Even though I pretty much lost a lot of my DraftKings and fantasy teams yesterday, I don't know. For whatever reason, call it turning a corner or whatever, or just call it Gary Barnidge continues to make me look good. I don't know. But it's all good. Anyway. All right. So until next week, he's Russell Clay. I'm Michael Moore, and we will see you next time.